Hello everyone, how's it going? Billy Ballgame here, back with another video. This is take two because the first video was 33 minutes and I realized that I had forgotten to show some of my cards. So I'm going to change it up a little bit on this one. So hopefully it's not an hour-long video. But on this channel, I'm just a dude who loves to talk about baseball cards. And I'm going to do that today by talking about the cards that are on my target list for the National. And again, I'm super excited about the National in case you haven't all been able to figure that out yet. And luckily in my comments from my last video, most of you have told me that you're not tired of hearing about the National yet, which is for me good news because I am giddy as a schoolgirl and want to keep talking about it. So hopefully this video doesn't push you all over the brink and make you tired of hearing about the National. And then also several of you in the comments have told me that you're going to be at the National. So I'm excited about that and hope I can meet a bunch of you. So again, on today's video, I'm going to talk about the cards that I'm going to target at the National. And you all know about 4 of those cards on the list. You know about the 33 Gowdy Rogers Hornsby, where he's fielding. I think the number is 119. You know about the 1948 Bowman Stan Musial rookie card. You know about the 59 Topps Bob Gibson rookie. You also know about the 68 Topps Nolan Ryan rookie. And there are some other cards on the list that I've added recently that I am going to talk about today. But before I flip the camera around and show you the cards that I'm looking at, I'm going to show you how I broke my list down. So I have about a 4-page list on here of cards that I'm targeting at the National. And they break down really kind of into 3 tiers. And tier 1 are the biggest cards that I've wanted for the longest amount. Well, not necessarily the longest amount of time, but they're like the biggest cards that I never really thought I'd be able to afford because I can't afford a Mays rookie. I can't afford a Mantle rookie. I can't afford a 52 Topps Eddie Matthews rookie or a 52 Topps Hoyt Wilhelm. But what I can afford is kind of the next tier of rookies. And a lot of those are what is on this list. So the tier 1 are kind of the biggest, most expensive cards. And then tier 2 is, for the most part, there are a few exceptions. The most part, they're a little bit more affordable. And then I have really kind of a tier 3, which I wrote on my list as cheaper cards. And they range from between like $50 and $400. And there are about 20 of those 3rd-tier cards on my list. And the reason why I have so many is, for example, I buy one card on my list that's a $2,000 card. I have $400 left over. So there are thousands of cards that I would want in my collection that are $400 or lower. So I came up with a list of something that will help keep me focused that range all the way from $50 up to $400. And then that way I have a pretty good range of money covered, and I have a pretty good idea of kind of the next cards that I would want to target. So if I end up with $200 left over, I have some $200 cards on the list. I'm not going to go through all of those because, again, this video would just be too long. So I'm going to cover the tier 1 and tier 2 cards because those are really kind of my main priorities at the National. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this around and start talking to you about the cards that are on my list. So let me pull up VCP here. All right, so hopefully you can see my screen. So probably the #1 card that I want to buy at the National, as long as it fits my budget and my eye appeal, is the 54 Topps Hank Aaron rookie. And this is just a card to me that's massive, that I've wanted my entire life and never for a second thought I would ever be able to afford. And this is a big card for me, and it's a pretty expensive card. So for the Hank Aaron rookie, I'm targeting in the 2.5 to 2 range in SGC or PSA, down to the 2 range. So roughly $1,900 to $2,500, somewhere in that range. Now, that may be above my budget at the National because, like I've said before, depending on food and gas and hotel, I think I'm going to have around $2,400. I could have a little less, could have a little bit more, but that is why I'm bringing some cards with me for just in case. Let's say a dealer wants $2,500 for a PSA 2.5 Hank Aaron, and it's a really sharp card that fits my eye appeal. That's the card that I want. Then I have a little bit of trade bait that I can use to maybe help close that gap if the dealer's not willing to come down a little bit on price, so I can pay for the whole thing with cash. So we'll just see how it breaks down. And I'm not dead set on these grades for any of these cards, but these are kind of the ranges that I'm looking in. And it all depends on how budget balances eye appeal, because I want to buy the best version of the card that I can afford. I want to buy the best eye appeal of the card that I can afford. If the best card I can find that's in my range is a 2, then I'll buy a 2 in this card all day long. So that's probably number 1 on my list. And then the second card on my list is the Roberto Clemente rookie. And this is a huge card, still very expensive, but it's a little bit cheaper than Hank Aaron. So I can afford to target higher grades potentially. And so kind of what I'm looking at here with the Roberto Clemente is between the 4 and 3 range. So a PSA 4 is $2,500. That's probably going to be too expensive, but an SGC 4 is $2,358. So I might be able to squeeze that into my budget. And then a 3 goes down to $1,767 and $1,897 respectively. And in the 3 grade, the SGC is actually more expensive. And I love it when SGC is cheaper than PSA, but that doesn't always happen. And if you watched my buddy Greg from Midlife Cards today, in his video, he goes over some of these cards. I think he used mostly 5 grades, but there were a pretty good chunk of those cards where SGC was actually more expensive than PSA. So, of course, for me, it works out better when SGC is cheaper because I actually prefer SGC. But so anyway, the cards that for the Roberto Clemente, I'm kind of targeting in the $1,700 to $2,400 range is really kind of what I'm looking at for that card. And then next on the tier 1 list, we have Sandy Koufax. And this one is still a huge card, but it drops down quite a bit even from the Clemente. So again, I can target a little bit higher of a grade, but that doesn't mean that I won't buy a 3 if I find a really nice 3 and save some money. So in the Sandy Koufax, basically the top of the range is a 5. And you can see SGC is more expensive than PSA in the 5 range or in the 5 grade. And then also just what I wrote down is down to a 4. And a 4 in PSA is $1,158. In SGC, it's $997. But like I said earlier, that doesn't mean I won't go down to a 3 if I find a really sharp one. So really kind of my sweet spot, like where I would want to be, is I would love to find a nicely centered, sharp example of a 4 and pay $1,000 for it. Potentially, if I don't buy a Hank Aaron or a Roberto Clemente. So if I bought a Sandy Koufax, then obviously I would have more money to go to buy other cards. But more than likely, if I buy a Hank Aaron, that's going to be the only card I buy at the National. If I buy a Roberto Clemente, depending on how much I pay for it, then I'll have money to buy other cards. So that's kind of where the tier 2 list comes in. And then the last one on the tier 1 list is a hockey card, and you can all probably guess which one that is. And this is also a card that I've wanted forever. As a matter of fact, several years ago when I was in Colorado and really into hockey cards, the dealer that I was going to his shop quite often came across a Wayne Gretzky rookie in the $200 range, but it had a big crease on the corner. I figured it would probably grade a 2, 2.5. And I just told him that I would rather hold out and buy a nicer version. And a nicer version never really came. Now, Wayne Gretzky is not the most expensive hockey card, rookie card in the hobby. But he's the best player in hockey history, in my opinion. To me, the big three are Wayne Gretzky, Gordie Howe, and Bobby Orr. The Gordie Howe and Bobby Orr are both more expensive than Wayne Gretzky. So for me, this is the equivalent in baseball to buying a Babe Ruth rookie. Babe Ruth's unquestionably the best baseball player in history, at least in my opinion, and I think a lot of opinions out there. Wayne Gretzky is the best hockey player in hockey's history. So for me, this is, even though it's a whole lot cheaper, this is as big as buying a Babe Ruth rookie in the hockey world. So what I'm looking here is in the 7 range. I could go up to a 7.5 at $1,856. A 7 is $1,577 in an SGC. PSA is $1,825, so it's considerably more expensive. So really, what I would want to look at, I would want to be right here in this range. Now, potentially, if I bought an SGC 7 Wayne Gretzky, like I have money left over to go buy another card off of the tier 2 list. But this card is tremendously usually off-centered. So it's hard to find them centered, and they frequently have fisheyes or print dots. So I'd like to find as nice as a 7 as I possibly can. So I may have to pay up for that a little bit. Now, just because I wrote 7 grades down doesn't mean I'm not willing to go down to a 6 if I can find a really sharp one that fits my eye appeal. Because again, it's all about that balance between budget and eye appeal. So that's kind of what I'm looking at in the Wayne Gretzky rookie. Sorry, my dog's barking upstairs. So that's it for the tier 1 cards. And then when I did this, film this earlier, I realized that I'd left off like half of my tier 2 list. So I'm actually not talking about the cards as long as I did a while ago, because this video would just be way too long. Oops, I typed in the wrong card. So one of the cards on tier 2 is the Ernie Banks rookie. And my buddy Tom, I believe at Strongsville, got a really nice version of this in an SGC 4 that was really sharp. A lot of these are off-centered top to bottom to where the edge is almost right up against the top of his name and the top of the Cubs logo. And Tom's was really nicely centered. And if I could find, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. If I could find a really nice version of this card in a 4, like I'd be happy with that, as long as I have money left over to look at the tier 2 cards. But kind of the range I'm looking at for the Ernie Banks is I have SGC 5, SGC 4.5, and SGC 4 written down. Now, a PSA 5 is actually cheaper than an SGC, and I didn't write that down, but I will definitely add it. The 4.5 in PSA is considerably more expensive, and so is the 4. But for some reason, a 5 is actually more expensive in SGC. So really, the range that I would be looking at for the Ernie Banks would be as much as $1,888, which I don't really know if I feel comfortable paying that for an Ernie Banks card, even though Ernie Banks is one of the all-time greats. And on the lower end, it would be $957. But I wouldn't pay $1,225 for a 3.5 unless it was just knock my socks off sharp. But I would go with a 3 if I could find a really sharp eye appeal version of a 3. So again, these grade ranges aren't set in stone. That just is going to kind of give me some guidelines of helping me figure out a range that I'm going to pay for these cards. But to me, the 1954 top set is one of, if not the most beautiful baseball cards that have ever been made. And I really do think that from 53 to 56, like Topps was on their game. And those are some of the most beautiful baseball cards ever made. So these are, again, are huge cards to me that I would be happy to add any of them to my collection. So next on tier 2, we have another 54 Topps rookie card. Aline. And this, again, is just an amazing looking card. But it's quite a bit cheaper than Ernie Banks. So for the Aline, the range that I'm looking at is I have a VC or a SGC 5 at the top end. And then I have 4s and 5s, SGC and PSA 4s and 5s. So in a 4, it's around $500. And then in a 5, it's around $800. And then here's a huge outlier. A 4.5 is more expensive than a 5. So my guess is some really, really sharp 4.5s have sold in order to push that above the 5. But again, it all goes down to eye appeal. So I'm not going to say I would pay that I wouldn't pay more for a 4.5 than I would a 5 if the 5 is a bad example and the 4 is a really sharp example. But that's kind of the range I'm looking at in the in the $500 to $800 range. Again, I could go up to a 6, but there's a huge jump there from a 5 or a 5.5 up to a 6. And to me, I don't want to pay, almost $400, $450 to go up one grade. But again, it just all depends on the eye appeal. And there's an even further spread in PSA. That's about $500. So that's kind of the range I'm looking at for the Aline. And again, this tier 2 is for if I buy, a Koufax or a Gretzky that are cheaper and I have money left over to where I can afford one of the tier 2 cards. The tier 3 cards are, I bought a bigger card on the tier 1 and I only have $200, $300, $400 left over. So next, this is another new one on my list that I've added here recently. 58 Bowman Yogi Berra. How can you not love Yogi Berra? Just one of the all-time great players and one of the all-time great personalities in baseball and played on so many amazing Yankees teams and won so many World Series championships as a player and a coach. Just Yogi's contribution to the history of baseball cannot be overlooked. So what I wrote down on the upper end of the range for Yogi Berra would be in the 5 range, which is roughly $1,000, down to the 4 range, which is about 800 or so. But again, don't think for a minute that I wouldn't drop down to a really sharp example of a 3 and pay $500 or $600 and then save money to buy more cards, because that's what it's all about, is how I can make the most bang for my buck in my collection at the National. So that's kind of the range I'm looking at for the Yogi. Again, in the $700 to $1,000 range. And obviously I won't be able to buy all these cards because I only have, like I said, $2,400. Not only because that's a tremendous amount of money for me that I never would have thought that I'd be able to spend on baseball cards, but obviously the money I'm taking with me does not fit buying all these cards. So another one that I've talked about before is the Mujica. And I really like these cards. Like, I wish they were color, but they're not. But the Yogi pose is awesome. And then Mutual looks so young. Like, I'd be happy to add either one of these, especially with you guys knowing that I'm a huge Cardinals fan. So I'm looking in the 3 to 4 range for the Mutual. So it goes as high as 1166 for a PSA 4, and then as low as 751 for an SGC 3. So that's kind of the range I'm looking at, in that 700 to as high as $1,200, roughly around their range. Now, I wouldn't want to push it up to a 5. I mean, I could afford to buy a 5, but if I buy a 5, I'll come home with a Mutual and like a $400 card, which again is fine with me. So we'll see how everything breaks down. And then another card that you guys have heard me talk about, the 59 Topps Bob Gibson. And I talked about what I'm looking for in this card. And of course, with all of them, I want a centered version with a really sharp surface and a really sharp registration, a nice picture, nice coloring, right? In a 5, if I'm going to buy a card in a 5, like, it's going to have dinged corners, and I'm fine with that. Like, it's to be expected with cards that are this old and the kind of grade range I'm looking at. And even on a Hank Aaron rookie, like you guys know, I don't like creases. But if I buy a PSA or an SGC2 in that ballpark, like, it's probably going to have a crease. So as long as it's kind of in a corner or off of his actual image, like, I'm fine with that, because it's such a big card. Like, I can't afford one that wouldn't have a crease. Like, I can't afford a 5 or a 6 in a Hank Aaron rookie card. So with the Gibson, I have a pretty big range here. So I have as high as a 6 and as low as a 4. And 6s are about $1,000 and 4s are about $500. So if I could find a really nice version of a 4 with the nice darker pink and that's centered really well, because we know how hard the centering is on these cards. Like, I would rather buy a 4, pay $500, save $500, and then have $500 to put toward another card. But that's kind of the range that I'm looking at. And I would consider a 3.5 or a 3, just depending on how sharp of a version the card is in that grade. So that's what I'm looking at in the Gibson. Now, these cards are the cards that I left off in the first filming of this video, but I'll cover them now, and hopefully I'm not yapping quite as much as I was, so it won't be a tremendously long video. All right, so we have the 68 Topps Nolan Ryan. You guys all know that this has been a target card on my list since I found out I was going to the National. Pretty much the Hornsby, the Mujica, the Gibson, and the Nolan Ryan were the first 4 cards on my list. So for the Nolan Ryan, I have as high as an SGC 6.5. Down to a 5. And I've seen some really nice 5s that have sold recently off of eBay. So I would buy a 5 all day long. I would buy a 4 all day long if I found a nice copy of a 4. But kind of the upper range would be the 6.5. And that really, I could buy that card and wouldn't have a problem paying $1,600 for a Nolan Ryan card because I love that card. I love Nolan Ryan. But if I were to go to $1,600 for a Nolan Ryan, then that means I'm not getting any of the cards that are tier 1 on my list, right? So preferably, I would like to keep this card under $1,000. I would like to find a really sharp SGC 5. Like that would be my happy spot. But upper end of the limit would be a SGC 6.5 at 1,664 down to an SGC 5 at $871 is kind of the range I'm looking to be at. But my preference would be $871 because I could afford a Wayne Gretzky rookie and a Nolan Ryan rookie, and I would come home with that and be ecstatic. So that's kind of what I'm looking for with Nolan Ryan. And then this card I also put on here. It's a huge card that I would love to own, but it would have to be a really good deal for me to buy one at the National. But I put it on my list anyway, just because it's a bigger card. And while I have, to me, a ridiculous amount of money to spend on baseball cards, like I wanted to aim at some of the bigger cards. And for some of you out here, $2,400 is a drop in the bucket. Like some of you are probably bringing $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to the National, which is awesome. And I would love to do that. However, that's not my situation. So again, I'm going to make the best bang for my buck with the money that I have. And kind of the range I'm looking for here is as high as an SGC 5.5 down to an SGC 4. Well, actually, a PSA 5.5. So a PSA 5.5 is 1720. An SGC 5.5 is 1622. Down to a 4, which is 1242 in SGC, and 1331 in PSA. So that's kind of the range that I'm looking at for Pete Rose. But this is kind of really, to me, just a long shot that would mean that I didn't find any of the other cards higher on this list that I like better, and I bought a Pete Rose. Now, again, it's a huge card. But to me, it's not as desirable to have at this point in my collection as some of the other cards on this list. But I love it. It's a great card and an iconic rookie card and huge within the hobby. Probably the most expensive rookie card in the 60s, at least that I can think of off the top of my head. Nolan Ryan and Tom Seaver are probably close, but I think Pete Rose is more expensive. And then last but not least, on the tier 2 list, if I can spell Gowdy, is the Rogers Hornsby 119 where he's fielding. Now, initially when I made this list and had this card on it, like I was pretty much looking at the 2 and 3 range. But I wrote down some other grades too, just so I had kind of a better idea of the range for this card. So I went as high as an SGC PSA 4 and as low as a 3. Now, that doesn't mean I won't buy a 2.5 or a 2 if I find a really sharp one. I would like to find a really sharp 3 if I were to buy this card. And it's cheap relatively in an SGC 3 at $583. On the top end, again, this is another card that SGC is more expensive than PSA. It's $1,185 versus a PSA at $1,051 right now, VCP average price. But then a PSA or an SGC 3 is considerably cheaper than a PSA 3. So this is kind of the range that I would be looking at. And in all reality, I would prefer to not go above $1,000 for this card. So if I could find a really nice 3, like that would be my spot. And that would probably be the one that I took home. So in order to add this, like again, how my tier list breaks down, like I would have to probably, like for example, if I bought a really nice 3 in Roberto Clemente and paid $1,800, $1,900 for it, then I could still afford this card potentially. But more than likely, I wouldn't be able to buy this card unless I didn't find a card off the tier 1 list. So if I don't find a card that works off the tier 1 list, then of course I'll bounce down to the tier 2. And there's some huge cards on there. Just generally, they're a little cheaper. So I'm gonna flip this around again. And then go ahead and wrap it up. So I did much better. So the first one was 33 minutes without half of the tier 2 cards. So again, tier 1, tier 2. Tier 1 is the preferred and probably the biggest. And then tier 2 is if the tier 1 card was cheap enough and I can still afford cards off the tier 2, then I would start looking at the tier 2 list. But more than likely, if I buy one, really Sandy Koufax and Wayne Gretzky are the only ones that I could buy off the tier 1 list and still be able to afford any of the cards off of tier 2. More than likely, if I buy a Clemente and an Aaron, like if I'm not done, like I'll be pretty close to it. But again, all of those cards on the tier 1 and tier 2 list are huge cards to me that I've wanted as long as I can remember. And then I have a wide range of stuff on the cheaper list, on the tier 3 list, that I would look at the National. And I have modern stuff, modern-ish, modern being like junk wax era or before. So I think what I'm going to do if I end up with, say, $400 left over is focus on the vintage as much as I can. I've got some for the 60 set on here. I've got the Hank Aaron All-Star, the Willie Mays, because I want to upgrade that card. I've got the Sandy Koufax. I've got the Willie Mays All-Star. I've got a Bowman rookie of Red Schoendienst on there, which really for his rookie card is pretty cheap, like $274 average price in an SGC 5. Like that's a pretty affordable card. Same thing with Warren Spahn. Like an SGC 4.5 Warren Spahn is $310. So depending on how much money I have after I buy my 1 or 2, however many biggest cards that I can buy, this is the list that I'm going to be looking at. 68 Topps Johnny Bench is on there, and it's an extremely affordable card. Like an SGC 6 is $262. Like that would be great. Another 60 set card that I don't have is the Willie McCovey rookie, which is also fairly inexpensive. Right now, an SGC rookie 6 is more than a PSA 6. Right now, an SGC 6 is $286. And I would go down to $149 to find a really nice example of a SGC 5. And then the 68 Topps Superstars card with Killebrew, Mays, and Mantle. My buddy Justin at Go Crazy Card Collecting just showed one of those from his 68 set, and I've loved that card as long as I can remember, along with the Birds Belters with the Robinsons, Frank and Brooks. I love those two cards, and they're relatively inexpensive. The Mantle, Mays, and Killebrew is $235 in an SGC 6. So that's definitely a card I would consider buying. And then I've got some newer stuff, 89 score Barry Sanders rookie, 91 Upper Deck Michael Jordan. Like, I would rather buy vintage. But if I have $50 left, I might buy a 1991 Upper Deck in an SGC 9. 71 Topps Yastrzemski. 75 Robin Yount. Like, that's shout out to my buddy Dylan at Double D Vintage Cards, or Double D. Yeah, Double D Vintage Cards. I'm sorry. I get so tangled up when it comes to channel names. But yeah, Robin Yount's rookie in an SGC 8 is $266. Like, that's a pretty reasonable card. Let's see. 72 Topps Carlton Fisk rookie. I had one that I got rid of. I would like to upgrade. An SGC 8's $165. A 65 Topps Steve Carlton in an SGC 7 is $320. Like, I would love to pick up an SGC 6 for $185. 71 Bob Gibson in an SGC 8 is $245. A 7 is $118. Like, great cards. So I have a few Bob Gibsons. Another huge rookie card that I don't have in my collection currently is a 69 Topps Reggie Jackson. An SGC 6 is $361. 55 Topps Harmon Killebrew in an SGC 5 is $308. A PSA 5 is $305. Again, another huge rookie card for me in the 50s. And right now, the only rookie card I have from the 50s is Ken Boyer. And I don't even have a lot of the rookie cards from the 60s at this point. I think I have 3 of them. So again, these are kind of lower priced cards that are still awesome to me, that I would be happy to pick up with $200 to $400 left over. 69 Topps Nolan Ryan in an SGC 6 is $385. In an PSA 6, it's $363. So again, a list of kind of some of the bigger vintage cards that I don't have. And again, I have a lot of newer stuff because I want the iconic rookie cards in football, basketball, and hockey also. And I have some of them on here. Dan Marino's rookie, John Elway's rookie, Eric Dickerson, Warren Moon. I'll probably focus on baseball, though, to be honest with you. And I'll probably focus more on the vintage side. Another card that I got rid of and want to upgrade is the 80 Topps Ricky Henderson rookie. I can get an SGC 8.5 for $334, an SGC 8 for $182. So that's another one on the list. 61 Gibson, 69 Johnny Bench, just a great card, his rookie cup card. SGC 7 is $330 and SGC 6 is $195. So all these cards are cards at some point I will add to my collection, but I want to work my way through all the rookie cards that I can afford from the 50s and 60s at least, and maybe even the 70s, because they'll happen much, much quicker. Because really the Mike Schmidt is the most expensive rookie card in the 70s, and it's reasonable. It's about $500 or so for a 7. So I'll work through the rookie cards, at least the 50s and 60s, maybe even in the 70s. And then I would like to go back and start getting some of these bigger Hall of Fame cards. 68 Topps Hank Aaron, 68 Topps Willie Mays. Those are relatively inexpensive. And then the 68 Topps Game, Mickey Mantle, crazy cheap. My buddy Justin and I were just talking about this card again the other day. He's got one in his collection. He's got the whole Topps game set. And this mantle in a 7, and an SGC 7 is $131. Like, how are you going to find a mantle in that grade for that cheap? Other than the next card on my list, which is a 64 Topps Giants mantle. I can get an SGC 8 for $222. And I love the Topps Giants. Like, I love the kind of oversized cards in SGC slabs because I think they display so amazingly well. So I really like the Topps Giants. And I like the exhibits. I have a Musial exhibits where he's kneeling with the 3 or 4 bats over his shoulder. And then I have the Bob Gibson 64 Topps Giants. And those are both up on my shelf over here, and I love them. I think they just display amazingly well. There may still be some cards to get added on this kind of third tier list. I have them listed as cheaper cards. I'm definitely going to add the 71 top or the 74 Topps #1 Hank Aaron Home Run King card. Like, I love that, and it's a relatively expensive card. So this third tier list may change a little bit, but that gives me, let me see where I'm at here. Tier 1, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 cards on tier 1. Again, those are the biggest. And then tier 2, I have 8. So that gives me a total of 12 cards on my main target list. And if I can come home with 2 or 3 of these cards, I'll be ecstatic. If I can come home with 1 card and it's a Hank Aaron and a Roberto Clemente, again, I'll be ecstatic. So hopefully I didn't babble too long, but I just kind of wanted to give you a glimpse at my target list for the National. And if any of you have any other cards that you would like to suggest that I add to my list that maybe I missed or didn't think of, please let me know in the comments. Like, I don't have the Duke Snyder, is it 49 Bowman rookie? I don't have the Campy 49 rookie, just because, you know, those are awesome cards and amazing players, but they're not as high on my want list as these cards on the tier 1. So I hope that gave you a glimpse into what's inside of my nugget for the National. And hopefully I didn't ramble on too long. I know I threw a lot of numbers and a lot of cards at you. But today is Thursday as I'm filming this. I don't know if I'll get it out today or tomorrow on Friday, but we are 2 weeks away from the first day of the National as of today. And then we're leaving on the Wednesday before. So, like, we have 13 days before we leave for the National, and I'm so excited, like it's not even funny. So again, hopefully this video isn't the one that pushes you over the edge and makes you sick of hearing about the National, but I just wanted to share my list with you all. So I'll wrap it up at that. So again, I appreciate everybody's support. If you're still with me in this 45-minute long rambling video, I can't even tell you how much I appreciate it. If you're still with me and you're back to the channel and you're not already subscribed, if you would do so, that would be great. I would appreciate that also. And if you could give this one a thumbs up. Until the next one, I hope everybody has a good one, and I'll talk to you later.